Blew heavy in Cruz das Almas that night, carrying the humid smell of recently rained earth and the acidic aroma of rotten leaves that piled up on the city's narrow streets. The wooden houses creaked as if they were alive, protesting against the force of the wind, and the windows, fogged up with moisture, reflected shadows that didn't belong to the residents. Helena walked slowly through the deserted streets, her footsteps echoing on the wet stones, feeling the weight of a silence too heavy to be natural. The sky was overcast, the moon hidden by dense clouds, and the air seemed impregnated with something ancient, a presence that watched every move, silent and patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. In recent days, reports of strange occurrences had multiplied throughout the town. Children would disappear from their homes in the dead of night and only return at dawn, silent, with wide eyes and hands stained with dry mud. Some refused to eat, others cried in silence, pointing to dark corners of the house, saying that they were there, behind the doors. Men and women, who were once resilient, began to hear footsteps that didn't exist, whispers that seeped through the cracks in the doors, voices that called their names in a distorted way. Each report increased the collective fear, and soon Cruz das Almas began to feel that something darker than the night itself was approaching. Helena, a teacher at the local school, spent sleepless nights. She always kept a candle lit next to her bed and a pair of iron scissors under her pillow, remembering the words of Madame Jassera, the old midwife of the town, who insisted, "Iron wards off those who walk between the living and the dead." Helena laughed when she first heard it, but on the third consecutive night that she heard dragging footsteps in the backyard, her laughter turned into silent dread. The heavy breathing of her own house seemed to compete with the wind, and the shadow of every tree that swayed in the street turned into a concrete threat. She could no longer distinguish the real from the imaginary. The fear was so palpable that it seemed to cling to her skin. Determined to understand what was happening, Helena decided to visit Madame Jassera. The old woman lived in a cabin on the edge of the woods, surrounded by herbs hung up to dry, glass bottles with murky liquids, black feathers, and twisted roots scattered on a makeshift table. Upon arriving, Helena was greeted by Jassera, whose appearance exuded a mixture of physical frailty and mystical authority. I see you've come to visit me for a reason," the old woman said, with a toothless smile. Helena recounted that she had seen a shadow with shining eyes in the street, which seemed to be watching her as she walked. Jassera took a deep breath, her body trembling slightly, and replied, "They have awakened. And now, they are hungry." The teacher asked for clarification, but Jassera just continued, "The forest guards those who never rested. Children who were abandoned, men unjustly executed, women burned as witches. Their bodies were swallowed by the earth, but their souls remain trapped. And now, the town grows over ancient bones. They have smelled life, they have felt the movement of the city, and they will not rest until they reclaim what was denied to them." That night, Helena had a dream that made her wake up in a panic. She was at school, but the desks were empty, and the voices of her students echoed around her, distorted, screaming her name. When she turned, she realized that the children were wearing bone masks, their empty, fixed stares terrifying her. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart beating uncontrollably, and realized that the fear she felt during the day was nothing compared to the feeling of being constantly watched. Meanwhile, the town began to succumb to the presence emerging from the woods. Mr. Dorian, a local merchant, was found dead in his own shop, his body twisted in a way that seemed impossible, as if every bone had been bent from the inside out. The door was locked from the inside, and only marks of muddy hands covered the counter. Terror began to take physical form, and the residents realized that nothing they knew could protect them. Some men tried to resist. Armed with shotguns and torches, they watched the entrance to the woods, determined to face whatever was causing so much suffering. But they didn't last even an hour. A fog appeared out of nowhere, completely enveloping them. Screams, gunshots, the sound of bodies being dragged, and then, absolute silence. When the fog dissipated, no one was there. Only extinguished torches and deep dragging marks led into the forest, as if the earth itself had swallowed those who dared to face the evil. Fear took over the town. Families fled to nearby roads, but many disappeared during the journey, pursued by phantasmagorical figures covered in mud, with human movements, but in a distorted way, as if they were between the living and the dead. Ilara remained in the town, unable to abandon her students, who were also disappearing little by little. Each night brought new horrors. Spectral children appeared in the windows, shadows crossed the streets silently, and distorted whispers called familiar names. On the following Thursday, the church bells rang on their own. Spectral figures occupied the central square, men and women with faces covered in black holes where eyes once were, some carrying chains, others with broken bones that rattled against each other like rattles. The dogs barked uncontrollably, the horses thrashed, and the sound of breaking glass echoed through the streets. Father Anthony disappeared during the chaos, and the cemetery became profane, open graves, scattered skeletons, coffins piled in the mud. Ilara ran to Jassera, who was sitting on the ground, weak, murmuring ancient words. "They walk among us," she said, her voice trembling. "There is no stopping them. All that's left is to choose, resist or surrender." Jassera mentioned an ancient ritual, a sacrifice capable of imprisoning the souls that rose from the woods again. Ilara felt disgust and horror, but she knew that time was running out. Meanwhile, Anna, one of the few surviving children, heard voices calling her name from outside. She saw Rosie, the girl who had disappeared weeks before, standing in her school uniform, with empty black eyes and a twisted smile on her pale face. Anna closed the curtain, praying, but she understood that Cruz das Almas was trapped in a cycle of terror that no one could break. The atmosphere of fear became unbearable. Spectral children sang distorted lullabies, and recognizable dead figures, Oscar, Rosie, Mr. Dorian, wandered the streets. Residents went mad or mutilated themselves, and only the strongest were able to maintain their sanity. Ilara, Anna, and a few survivors began to search for answers, heading to the central square, where the stone cross stood as a symbol of a bloody past. Everyone remembered ancient stories about the cross, but no one had ever imagined that it would be the center of the terror that now plagued the town. A group of residents decided to investigate the cross at night. Sheriff Maurice led the expedition, accompanied by Peter and other men from the town. They crossed the square with torches, feeling the pressure of the heavy air, which carried the metallic smell of ancient blood. When they reached the cross, they noticed strange symbols in the fissures of the stone, twisted faces, incomplete circles, and drawings that resembled human figures in agony. Peter, overcome with rage, tried to break the cross. Augustus, the oldest resident, shouted to stop him, warning that breaking the seal would free the contained souls. It was too late. The axe fell against the stone, echoing like thunder. A deep lament rose from the ground, reverberating through the square and the surrounding woods. The shadows began to emerge from the forest, men without faces, women with sewn mouths, children with empty eyes. They advanced slowly, but with unwavering determination, towards the town. The sheriff shot, but the figures passed through the shots like smoke. A skeletal arm touched his shoulder, and Maurice fell dead, his eyes wide and full of terror. The survivors fled, dragging themselves on the ground, without the courage to look back. Peter was surrounded and taken by the darkness. Anna and Augustus ran, reaching the bridge over the river, where they finally stopped, breathing heavily. Behind them, the shadows stayed on the other side, motionless, just watching. The wind continued to bring the distant lament of voices. Anna and Jasera remained on their knees before the stone cross, scattering salt and chanting ancient prayers. A faint light rose from the ground, radiating from the cross and temporarily weakening the shadows. Cruz das Almas breathed, but it was still marked by horror. Jasera murmured, "We did it, for now. They never forget. They will always return." The silence that followed was heavy, but Anna realized that the peace was only temporary. Cruz das Almas remained alive, and the certainty of the spirit's return hung in the humid air, impregnated in every stone, in every tree of the ancient forest. Fear had not disappeared, it had only receded for a moment, awaiting the right time to reclaim the life it had lost. When the first light of dawn managed to penetrate the heavy clouds, Cruz das Almas didn't look different from the night before. The ground was still soaked, and the central square, marked by the stone cross, exuded an invisible presence, but one that was felt in every pulse of the air. Helena, still trembling from the night of horrors, got up with difficulty, feeling the weight of every disappeared body and every scream that had echoed in the darkness. The streets were deserted, but the feeling that something was watching every movement remained. She began to walk through the alleys, checking each house. The doors were locked, some broken, windows shattered. There were no visible residents, but the silence was loaded, dense, almost suffocating. In some houses, marks of muddy hands appeared on the walls, as if they were trying to reach the world of the living. Helena felt a shiver run down her spine. Even in broad daylight, there was no safety in Cruz das Almas. As she walked, she found Anna sitting on a doorstep, hugging her knees, her eyes dark with fear. "I don't sleep anymore, Helena," the girl said, her voice trembling. "They don't leave us alone. I feel it, every night, every minute. They are always waiting." Helena held the girl's hand and took a deep breath. "We need to stick together. We can't let fear defeat us. We need to find a way to contain them, to prevent them from advancing again." The answer came almost instantly when Madame Jasera appeared, coming out of the shadow of an alley with an old handful of dried herbs in her hands. "They are not simple ghosts," she said, her voice hoarse, firm. "They are vengeful memories, souls trapped in ancient suffering. They feed on fear and the life that grows over their bones. If we want to survive, we will have to face them head-on." Helena frowned. "How?" she asked, knowing that any answer would be terrifying. "The cross contains part of them," Jasera replied, pointing to the center of the square. "But it is not eternal. It was made to trap what was unjustly lost. Every time the seal weakens, they try to cross, and every living soul becomes a target. There is only one way to prevent them from advancing: courage, willpower, and ancient rituals that have been almost forgotten." The old woman took a deep breath. "It's risky, and many won't survive." As they spoke, the town began to tremble slightly, as if the shadows of the night had not yet completely withdrawn. Helena looked towards the woods, and for a moment, she swore she saw distorted shapes moving among the trees, tall, narrow shadows that disappeared at the slightest movement of her eyes. "They're coming again," she said, not daring to blink. "And they're stronger." The minutes dragged on, and the morning's silence was broken by screams coming from nearby houses. Doors opened on their own, and figures began to emerge from the internal shadows, familiar faces twisted by eternal suffering. Ilara recognized Oscar, the Mun who had disappeared weeks before, Rosie, the girl with the black eyes, and many other residents who had vanished mysteriously. They didn't seem alive, but not entirely dead. Their steps were heavy, dragging, and every movement emitted a sound that made the heart race. Anna began to cry, hiding her face in Ilara's arm. "They're going to take us," she whispered, almost inaudibly. "No," Ilara replied, squeezing the girl's hand. "Not as long as we're together." Madame Jassera then began to trace ancient symbols on the ground around the stone cross, using a mixture of salt and ashes, while chanting prayers that seemed to echo from time immemorial. The shadows hesitated, stamping their feet on the ground, as if they were trying to cross an invisible boundary. Ilara felt the strength of the ancient seal react to the courage of those three women and realized that there was a possibility, however tenuous, of containing the advance. But the threat was not contained. Shapes began to emerge from all corners, spectral children running through the streets, men and women advancing with empty eyes, some carrying chains, others with broken bones that rattled against each other. Cruz das Almas was transforming into a silent battlefield, where life was trying to protect itself from the vengeful memories of death. Ilara, Anna, and Jassera continued the ritual, but the physical and mental effort was extreme. Every word, every symbol drawn on the ground, required absolute concentration. The wind increased, carrying screams, laments, and children's laughter. A metallic odor of blood mixed with the smell of wet earth. Ilara felt nauseous, but she couldn't stop. She knew that any hesitation could mean the death of everyone who still remained in the town. The shadows began to recede, but not completely. The cross glowed faintly, emitting a light that seemed to come from the very core of the stone. Anna, trembling, held Ilara's hand, trying to absorb strength from the teacher. The town seemed suspended in time, the sky heavy as if it wanted to crush every living soul under its weight. In the midst of the confusion, Maurice, the sheriff, appeared. He had survived the previous night, hidden in one of the more distant houses. "We need to reinforce the circle," he said, his voice firm, although visibly exhausted. "We can't let anyone pass. If we break discipline, they will cross again." Together, the five of them, Ilara, Anna, Jassera, Maurice, and Augustus, began to reinforce the symbols on the ground, spreading more salt and ashes, drawing circles and figures that intertwined, forming a labyrinth of protection around the cross. Every movement was watched by invisible eyes, and every shadow that approached made the ground tremble. In the middle of the ritual, one of the spectral children advanced directly towards Anna. The girl screamed, but Ilara managed to hold her. The instant she touched the child, the figure dissolved into black smoke, as if it had been contained by the power of the cross. They don't understand fear," Jassera said, panting. They only understand strength." The sun began to rise timidly on the horizon, and the shadows slowly receded. Cruz das Almas seemed to breathe again, but everyone knew that the victory was temporary. Ilara felt that something inside her had changed. The courage she had felt was enough to keep the spirits at bay for now, but not to defeat them definitively. The town was marked. Houses were still deserted, streets were full of holes, and a heavy silence hung over every corner. The residents who remained alive gathered in the square, some in a state of shock, others in silent mourning, realizing that Cruz das Almas would never be the same. The woods, now watched with fear and respect, seemed to whisper promises of return, and the wind carried the echo of distant voices. Madame Jassera sighed deeply, looking at Ilara and Anna. We managed to stop them for now, but they will return. They always will. And each time they will be stronger. We need to prepare the town, strengthen the seal, teach those who can still hear. Evil is not a fleeting visitor, it is part of what we built over ancient bones. Anna looked at the cross, her eyes welling up. So we'll never be safe? She asked, her voice almost breaking. Never completely, Helena replied, holding her hand tightly. But as long as we're together, as long as we don't give in to fear, we can survive. And that's enough, for now. The wind began to blow again, carrying the smell of earth and leaves, but now mixed with a strange sense of hope. Cruz das Almas had survived the first night of chaos, but the harbinger of new visits remained, invisible, silent, ready to test the courage of those who still breathed again. The days that followed were the longest in the life of Cruz das Almas. Each dawn brought an almost palpable tension, as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for the next attack from the shadows. Helena, Anna, and Madame Jassera dedicated themselves to organizing the survivors, teaching them the importance of maintaining circles of protection with salt, candles, and ancient symbols that Jassera drew with precision. Even so, no one slept. Every noise, every movement of a tree or sound of the wind was interpreted as a harbinger of new horrors. Commerce was paralyzed. Shops remained closed, many with broken doors and shattered windows. Some residents tried to grow gardens or care for animals, but the soil seemed impregnated with an ancient, malignant energy, and plants quickly withered, while birds remained in absolute silence, watching from the treetops. The woods around the town seemed to breathe, pulsating with a life of their own, laden with a silent, ancient rage. One night, Anna woke up to the sound of children's laughter coming from outside her house. Slowly, she approached the window and saw a group of spectral children playing in the street, their distorted laughter echoing against the walls of the houses. But there was something different that night. The children were not alone. Adult figures emerged from the fog, faces covered in wounds and deformities, arms too long, legs that dragged on the ground. They watched every move of the survivors, calculating, waiting for the right moment to attack. Helena felt her heart race. "They're learning," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "They're getting bolder. Getting stronger." Madame Jassera appeared by her side, holding lit candles and a small handful of salt. "The seal is weakening," she said, her voice hoarse. "We don't have any more time. We need to act before they figure out how to cross for good." The next morning, a new disappearance shook the town. Peter, known for his courage and stubbornness, was last seen near the woods. Apparently, he decided to face the specters alone. Residents found only his footprints, which disappeared abruptly among the trees, as if the earth had swallowed them in. Fear turned into panic, and the town began to retreat, taking refuge in homes and avoiding any contact with the forest. Helena met with the bravest survivors. "We need to face this in an organized way," she said. "We can't let disorder consume us. We need to reinforce the cross, protect the town, and, if necessary, face what comes." Augustus, the oldest resident, nodded. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "They aren't just spirits, they are vengeance, suffering, pain accumulated over centuries. Every attempt to face them directly is an enormous risk. But if we do nothing, there will be no town, no survivors." That night, Helena, Anna, Jassera, and a few selected residents walked to the cross, carrying candles, salt, and makeshift weapons. The darkness was intense, almost suffocating. The moon, hidden by thick clouds, did not offer even a thread of light. Every step towards the square seemed like a challenge to sanity itself. When they arrived at the cross, they realized that the fissures in the stone had widened since the last time. Ancient symbols, twisted faces, and incomplete circles formed an even more complex pattern, as if the cross had absorbed the suffering of the last nights and transformed into something alive. Helena extended her hands and touched the stone, feeling an intense vibration pass through her body. It was as if the cross itself was breathing, responding to the presence of someone alive and courageous. Then, the fog emerged from the woods, carrying the metallic smell of ancient blood. Shapes began to emerge slowly, children with empty black eyes, deformed adults, some with chains and open wounds. The group formed a circle around the cross, tracing symbols on the ground, spreading salt and chanting ancient prayers. Every movement was vital, every hesitation could mean instant death. One of the spectral children advanced towards Anna. The girl screamed, but Helena managed to hold her, looking into the spectral's empty eyes and reciting a prayer that Jasera had taught her. The figure dissolved into black smoke, but behind it, others appeared, increasingly numerous, advancing from all sides. The wind brought whispers, laughter, laments, and screams, mixed into a terrifying chorus. Maurice, the sheriff, organized the remaining survivors. "Don't retreat," he shouted, pointing to the shadows. "We need to maintain the circle. If one of us fails, we will all fall." The attack lasted for hours, each moment stretching out until it seemed like an eternity. The physical and mental effort was extreme. Sweat ran down Helena's face, mixed with the mud that covered the streets. But something inside her seemed to resist, a silent, implacable force that fed on simultaneous courage and despair. The cross began to glow with a faint light, emitting a vibration that seemed to push the shadows back. The ancient power that Jasera had mentioned was alive and responding to the determination of the living. But the battle was not won. Some figures began to cross the boundaries of the circle. Skeletal arms touched the ground, invisible hands tried to pull the survivors into the darkness. Anna, trembling, held Helena's hand, trying to absorb her courage. Every scream, every touch, seemed to tear away pieces of everyone's sanity. When the first light of dawn appeared, the shadows slowly receded. Some returned to the woods, others disappeared in clouds of black smoke. The town seemed to finally breathe, but everyone knew that the victory was temporary. Cruz das Almas remained marked by terror, and the woods around it continued to pulse with an ancient, silent presence, awaiting the right moment to resume the attack. Madame Jasera looked at Helena and Anna. "We managed to hold them for now," she said, exhausted, "but they never forget. Every time the seal weakens, they will try to cross again, stronger. We need to prepare the town for this, teach the survivors, reinforce the cross, and keep fear under control." Helena felt the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. The town was saved for now, but she knew that every night could bring a new attack, and that Cruz das Almas would never be the same. The dead do not rest, and the forest does not forget. She looked at Anna, who was still trembling, and held her hand firmly. "We will survive. For now." The wind continued to blow, carrying the smell of the earth and leaves, and a distant echo of voices seemed to whisper promises of return. Cruz das Almas would remain standing, but the horrors of the woods were only beginning to show their true strength. The following nights in Cruz das Almas were long and sleepless. Every sound became a threat, the creaking of floorboards, the whisper of the wind, the irregular beat of the heart. The town seemed to have aged decades in a few weeks, and the remaining residents carried the lost look of those who had already witnessed horrors that defy any human comprehension. Helena, Anna, Jasera, and the few survivors were constantly on alert, reinforcing the seal of the cross and keeping the protection circles alive. But the feeling that the woods were watching every step, every breath, never left them. One night, when the moon finally broke through the clouds, a dense fog appeared again, darker and more oppressive than before. It covered the entire town, making streets, houses, and people invisible. The voices began as whispers, calling familiar names. Then came the dragging footsteps, the distorted screams, and figures began to emerge from nothing. Children with black eyes, men and women with broken and deformed bodies, faces twisted by suffering. Cruz das Almas was surrounded, and the seal of the cross seemed to tremble under the pressure of the ancient force emanating from the forest. Helena realized that the situation required immediate action. "We need to reinforce the circle now," she shouted to the survivors as Jasera ran, tracing symbols with salt and ashes, her eyes shining with determination. Anna held the teacher's hand, trying to absorb the courage that came from someone who remained firm in the face of horror. The figures advanced slowly but inexorably, as if every step was calculated, measured to extract the maximum possible fear. Some spectral children seemed to be having fun, running among the adults, their distorted laughter echoing in the fog, while older, heavier shadows pushed against the limits of the circle. Suddenly, one of the survivors fell, pulled into the fog. His scream was swallowed by the immediate silence that followed, and Helena felt the terror of imminent death beat in her chest. "I maintain the circle," Jasera ordered, her voice firm, even if it was trembling. "If one of us fails, we all fall." Hours passed. Every second seemed like an eternity. The physical and mental effort was extreme. Sweat ran down Helena's face, mixed with the mud that covered the streets. But something inside her seemed to resist, a silent, implacable force that was fueled by simultaneous courage and despair. The cross glowed faintly, radiating an energy that pushed the shadows back. The ancient power that Jasera had mentioned was alive and responding to the determination of the living. Then, something unexpected happened. A strong wind swept through the square, carrying leaves, dust, and fragments of earth. The figures began to writhe, as if something was repelling them. The glow of the cross intensified, forming an aura that seemed to touch every soul present in the town. Helena felt a tingling sensation run through her entire body, an almost supernatural connection between her and the seal that kept the shadows at bay. It was as if the entire town was breathing with the cross, every stone and every tree pulsating with life and fear simultaneously. But the victory was not yet complete. From within the woods, a different figure emerged, taller and older than all the others. Its eyes were black pits that seemed to suck in the light, and its presence exuded a cruel and ancient authority. Helena felt her heart stop for a moment. She knew that this was the central entity, the source of the terror that plagued Cruz das Almas. The creature advanced, and the fog seemed to follow its footsteps as if it were an extension of its body. Jasera, without hesitation, began to recite the most ancient prayers, those that only the oldest people in the town remembered. Symbols appeared on the ground as if written by time itself, connecting the cross to the strength of the earth, to the memories of all the unjustly dead. Helena held Anna tightly, feeling her fear transform into determination. The confrontation lasted all night. The central entity attacked incessantly, launching smaller figures against the survivors, testing the limits of the circle. Every advance was repelled by the combination of courage, symbols, and faith that Jasera maintained with almost religious rigor. The sound of bones breaking, spectral bodies dissolving into black smoke, and distorted laughter mixed with the wind that blew over the town. When the first light of dawn appeared, the central entity slowly receded, pushed back by the strengthened seal and the collective force of the living. The smaller shadows disappeared into the woods, and the wind brought the smell of wet earth mixed with the metallic odor of ancient blood. Cruz das Almas finally breathed, but the air was still laden with the memory of the night, the echo of laments and screams still vibrating in the walls of the houses. Helena, exhausted, fell to her knees before the cross, holding Anna. "We did it, for now," she murmured, feeling the weight of every lost life and every trauma faced. Jasera approached, still firm, tracing the last symbols and spreading salt around the stone. "They were not defeated," she said, her voice hoarse, only contained. "The town resisted, but the forest, the dead, the ancient suffering, everything remains alive. They will always return, each time stronger, each time hungrier." In the following days, the survivors worked to repair the houses, clean the streets, and maintain constant vigilance. The children who returned somehow maintained an empty gaze, and Anna felt the presence of the souls even in moments of silence. Helena began to teach the residents about the symbols, the importance of salt and faith, preparing the town for future nights of terror. The forest continued to watch. Every tree, every shadow, every branch seemed to pulsate with a life of its own, ready to swallow anyone who ventured beyond the safe boundaries. Cruz das Almas was no longer just a town, it was a temporary bastion between the living and the dead, a place where courage and fear intertwined every moment. And even when the wind blew softly, bringing the smell of rain and wet earth, Helena knew that the peace was only an illusion. The voices of the woods, the laments of the unjustly dead souls, the distorted laughter of the spectral children, everything remained, invisible, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what had always belonged to them. The cross remained standing, a symbol of resistance and a reminder of the ancient suffering. Helena, Anna, and Jasera remained together, vigilant, aware that every breath, every step, and every action could mean the difference between survival and the complete destruction of the town. Cruz das Almas had survived the first great night of terror, but the lesson was clear: the dead do not rest, and the forest does not forget. Evil was always lurking, hidden among trees and shadows, ready to return, stronger and crueler. And the living needed to be prepared, keeping courage alive and the seal of the cross intact, even when fear seemed unbearable. The echo of the lost voices still resonated between the houses and the alleys. Every night, Helena felt the cold of the presence that had never truly left. Cruz das Almas was a marked, cursed, and guarded place, an intertwining of life, death, fear, and courage. And everyone who still breathed knew, deep down, that this battle had no end. It only began again every night, when the wind blew and the woods called for the forgotten souls.